Kevin Walsh, what should be the future role of NASA, if any? Should it continue to man space program, Mars, return to the moon, then Mars? Congress and Obama just established space property rights law. Any thought on that? As Glenn Reynolds says, that is the only thing good that will come out of this administration when history is being written, is the fact that you can develop privately outer space, and the only reason Barack Obama let that happen because it's one of the things that Barack Obama I caught myself doing it. Space exploration is one thing that Barack Obama simply could not care less about. In 2006, we were spending $14 billion a year on NASA, and we were flying 4 space shuttles multiple times a year. In 2015, we're spending $14 billion on NASA, and we're not flying anybody anywhere. So somebody explain to me why, if they claim that it took $14 billion to launch a number of space shuttles and keep 4 of them in constant operation, that would take $14 billion. I think that number is ridiculously high, but at least I'm getting space flight out of it. To say that the same organization needs the same amount of money to do nothing in space? To what? To sit behind a console and talk to the International Space Station? Does it cost the same amount of money as it does to launch any number of shuttle flights and keep 4 orbiters in flying condition? No. NASA has become, like everything else in the federal government, it's an immortal job program. It's an immortal job program. It used to be for engineers and test pilots. Now it's for bureaucrats and managers and administrators. So I do have an answer to this, though. NASA's budget should be slashed enormously. There are 2 things that I think NASA should do. One of them is that NASA should continue to work with places like JPL, help coordinate with JPL, and now Johns Hopkins University has done some great work on some of these probes. I think it was Johns Hopkins that did the New Horizons probe. You know, it took Voyager 6-7 years to get to Jupiter, and New Horizons got there in 4 months because New Horizons was hauling ass. It took 15 years to get to Pluto, and they did it. They shot terrific pictures. That wasn't NASA. That was Johns Hopkins, coordinated by NASA. So I think the place for NASA is to fund and help to fund missions of exploration through robots, preparatory to going there by humans, and the humans need to go there through private companies, because I'll get to that in a second. I think the other thing that NASA should be doing right now is that NASA should basically be what NACA was. The NASA evolved out of the NACA, the National Advisory Council on Aeronautics. And what NACA did was virtually every airfoil, every wing design that flies today or has ever flown really, was basically developed by NACA. There's on the canard on my airplane, it's a NACA airfoil. I don't know what the number is, but it's like NACA 2119 or whatever the number is. So during the years prior to the 60s, NACA, before it became NASA, did fundamental research into aeronautics. So they changed it to include end space. So this primary research is appropriate for the government, and I'd be willing to spend tax dollars on it. I don't want to spend $14 billion if you're not going anywhere, guys. But NASA today should be working on things like this Vasimir drive, variable thrust, plasma drives. They should be doing research into nuclear rockets. They did an incredible job with Project Nerva. They built 22 nuclear rockets. Every one of them functioned except for the one that they didn't fire up. That's what NASA should be doing. And then that technology that's being driven, the raw technology being driven by NASA, that data should be made available to everybody because it's public information paid for by the taxpayers. And then private companies should use that data to come up with commercial developments of that fundamental foundational research. And then commercial companies will use their expertise and their skill and their competitiveness to achieve the kind of spaceflight that we should have achieved 40 years ago. And as somebody has said, and very truly said, it's one of the best examples I heard from, it might have been, I don't remember who it was. I am a little concerned about my memory tonight. I seem to have a problem remembering all kinds of names tonight. But somebody said that if we'd had an FAA during the dawn of aviation, then right now in 2015, if I wanted to fly from Los Angeles to New York, if there'd been an FAA from the beginning, then I would buy a ticket on a propeller-driven wood-winged airplane that would seat 30 of us, would take 30 hours to get from Los Angeles to New York, and it would cost $8,000 per seat. That's what would have happened if the FAA had been there from the beginning. The reason that civil aviation advanced as fast as it did it in 20 years. The jet age happened in 10 years. Most people don't know this, but the first reliable commercial jet, the first jet that really changed aviation, started the jet age. The first commercial jet was a de Havilland Comet, British design. But the Comet had square windows, and they didn't think that was a problem, but they found out when you keep pressurizing and depressurizing the fuselage, you're basically inflating it like a balloon, high pressure, so it can go high, and then you lower the pressure when it comes down, and the pressure comes in from the outside. So it's like inflating a rigid aluminum balloon that doesn't actually move. And what they found through having lost 2 airplanes was square windows provide a stress riser that right there on the square is where the cracks and the fractures started to happen from this constant flexing of it getting pressurized and depressurized. And 2 comets, might have been 3, but certainly 2, broke up in midair simply because they had rectangular windows. That's why every airplane window you ever see is oval-shaped, because the oval doesn't have a right-angle stress riser to start the cracks going. So my point, though, was the first real jetliner, the first modern jetliner was the Boeing 707. Most people today could probably not tell the difference between a Boeing 707 from a 737, except it's considerably smaller and narrower. But most people do not know that the Boeing 707, which I want to say first flew in 1958, somewhere in that ballpark, pretty close to that. The Boeing 707 that flew in 1958 is no faster than the latest 737, the A380, the 747, the 777, the Dreamliner, the 787. Every single one of these airplanes going back since 50 years ago, 60 years ago. For 60 years, every single commercial airplane has flown at the same top speed, and that top speed is approximately 550 miles an hour. You could probably get up to 6 or so. Shut up, Foghorn, you miserable lowlife bastard. I hate this guy. No wonder he says. I'm talking about no one's been able to fly faster than 550 miles an hour in the last 50 years. And then this guy who's my friend who flies F-16s for a living writes simply, I can. Well, good for you. Why don't you go start your own airline then? Why don't you just start an airline of people in the backseat of F-16s and I'll promote it for you, you miserable lowlife son of a bitch. I hate these military pilots. They're so arrogant. Yeah, he can. He can fly it probably, I don't know. He's probably flown it. Viper's probably flown it. Certainly he's flown it 1,200 knots, and he's probably pushed 1,600 knots. That's probably the end. He's broken 1,000 knots. He's probably been in the thousands, 700, 800, 900 knots, 1,000, 1,200 maybe in an emergency. He'll tell me in a minute, the lowlife. But look, the civilian airliners today travel at the speed they traveled 60 years ago. They haven't gotten any faster. They generally travel at the 0.9 Mach, 0.89, 0.8, high 0.8s, low 0.9s. In other words, they travel in the high 80s to the low 90% of the speed of sound. Concorde exceeded the speed of sound. Obviously, that could travel almost at twice the speed of sound. That airplane was doing probably 1,400 knots, going twice as fast, maybe 3 times fast, as a commercial jetliner today. Why is this important? Oh, because of NASA. So, nevertheless, all these airfoils were devised and basically put in the vault by NACA. It was a government agency, had nothing to do but build these airfoils, put them in a wind tunnel, measure the drag, measure the lift, measure the various amounts of lift at a certain angle of attack and the drag, write all this stuff down. Now we'll design a new airfoil, see if it does better, see if it does worse. And sure enough, that's been effective. And NASA should be doing that with propulsion. They should restart the NERVA program. They should be looking at ion propulsion. They should be looking at some of these differential gravity propulsions. That's a good thing to spend tax money on, but a limited amount. And very parenthetically, if you ask me how I think we should run the taxes in this country, I think that we should only be compelled to pay a tax to cover federal tax, to cover what is outlined in the enumerated powers of the Constitution and at the most frugal rate we can get them. In other words, every American should pay a same percentage of their income to cover the things that are outlined by the Congress, outlined by the Constitution in the enumerated powers, and that's it and that's all. However, I do think that our tax system ought to include a pull-down menu where you basically say, hey, I'd like to pay another $1,000 and I'd like all of it to go to NASA. Or I want to pay another $60 in taxes and I want it all to go to NPR. Or I want to pay $400 more in taxes and have it go to Planned Parenthood or whatever. I think we should have to pay for the stuff that the Constitution requires us to pay for, that we all share in common. And if you want to kick more in, then knock yourself out. And if you want to earmark it, I think that's great too. That's what I think we ought to do. Let's see here.